So I've been playing a lot more console video games lately. Primarily just because I've been getting into kind of collecting the physical things and having a shelf to put them on and whatnot. And it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy owning physical things, and unfortunately, a lot of PC releases just do not have physical releases. And if they do, they're typically far more expensive, making it not exactly lucrative to purchase them. However, most of this console collecting and purchasing that I've been doing has been on older systems. Today, specifically, talking about a GameCube game. And if, in case you couldn't tell from the title of the video already, this is my thoughts on, there we go, Metroid Prime. Uh, Metroid Prime, to me, is one of the best GameCube games ever created, I think. It has a fantastic atmosphere, fantastic gameplay throughout, fantastic music. It's just very well designed, although it is quirky, and it does have flaws, and we'll absolutely talk about the flaws. So I'm going to do these kinds of videos implying that you don't know anything about the game. Even if you do, you can just sort of skip forward a little bit. I don't know. I won't have a timestamp as to when I'm done explaining it. But either way, we're going to start kind of from the beginning here. Metroid Prime, following the rest of the Metroid series, has kind of a gameplay element to where you feel like it's kind of a semi-open world. I guess open world isn't the term you should use. It should be kind of non-linear. Or at least masked as non-linear. What I mean by this is, much like the later Castlevania games, the Metroid games follow a very specific style of giving you this big environment to explore, but effectively locking you out of certain areas until you get specific types of upgrades, whether it's like a grappling hook, a double jump, ball form, whatever it is. There are all sorts of different things that the game gives you, but you don't start out with all of them. You actually start out with just about nothing. And of course, speedrunners have found ways to sequence break and get things before they were intended, and that's all well and good. But for the casual playthrough, it's a lot of exploring and simply trying to find the next thing that you need to progress. The game starts you off in kind of a tutorial-esque area, which starts you with a majority of the power-ups that you'll have. Not all of them. For instance, you only get one weapon, one visor, and all that, but you have your grappling beam, your morph ball, all that kind of stuff, and it just sort of shows you through how to play the game. Playing the game, depending on who you ask, is either a joy or a chore. The quirky thing about the GameCube, let's see, right here, the controller does not lend itself very well to the first-person shooter style, which Metroid Prime is. And actually, good time to note, Metroid Prime is the first time that the Metroid series went into a first-person perspective. So that's interesting. But the way that the GameCube controller is sort of rolled out with the C-stick, the C-stick is not very good for aiming much of anything. There are a few games that tried. I believe 13 was on GameCube. Call of Duty Finest Hour made its way on there. I think a couple of Medal of Honor games. So it's not impossible, but it's not ideal. So what they did with Metroid Prime is they gave it a very unique kind of control scheme to where you simply move around with the analog stick as you would expect, but the analog stick just turns you and moves you backwards and forwards. How do you aim then? Hold down this button right here, that puts you in an aiming mode. And then you hold down this button right here, and then it locks on a thing. So it's kind of this whole aim, lock on, move around while you're locked on. If you hold down aim, you can strafe instead of turn. It's a super kind of wonky control scheme, and I'll be the first to admit that. Not quite as bizarre as the Resident Evil tank controls, but it still takes a lot of getting used to. One of the other big problems that comes with that control set is the fact that because this is a Metroid game, there's a lot of platforming. However, it's a 3D first-person platformer. That's where a lot of the kind of frustrations of playing the game can come in, are when you're in those platforming sections. You might think that you can make the jump, or think that you have to run a little bit further so you can get maximum jump distance, and either you undershoot it and miss the platform completely, or you just walk right off of the platform you're already on. That happens a lot. The combat as well is kind of simple in some ways. By the end of the game, you unlock 4 different weapons. You have your power beam, ice beam, wave beam, plasma beam. And they all have kind of similar functions in where you can just tap A to fire regular shots, hold it for a charge shot, and then all of them have unlockable kind of like super attacks kind of things. You also have a missile launcher that works with any beam. So it gives you enough ways to go around, but honestly, by the time you unlock the plasma beam, you're not really going to be using much of anything else anyway, with the exception of a couple enemies who are only specifically vulnerable to specific beam types, which is a nice kind of balanced design to force you to switch it up and keep using all of your weapons instead of just using the most powerful one. So I do like how they did that. They forced you into using all of your resources, even though you have one that is kind of objectively better than most of them. In terms of the actual environments themselves, you've got a lot of kind of standard fare, your typical kind of lush green zones, your internal sci-fi-esque areas with all your terminals and everything all over. You got a giant fire level, a giant ice level. But honestly, my favorite of all of them sounds like one of the more kind of mundane ones, and that is the Chozo Ruins. It's the second area that you find, basically the first one that you do much of anything in. You land on the Talon overworld, and then you basically go straight to the Chozo Ruins. And the Chozo Ruins are so well done. The music is great for it. The environment is spectacular. The area rather, really sets you up for the fantastic feeling of isolation and dread that you kind of get throughout the whole game. There are no real cutscenes to speak of, a couple here and there, like before and after a boss battle maybe. But you don't have anybody that you're talking to. There's no radio comms or anything. It is just you on that planet by yourself, surrounded by hostility everywhere. And the Chozo Ruins does a great job of kind of launching you off from that point and telling you this is what you should be expecting from here on. So, very well done there. And I remember years and years and years ago, when I was in high school, one of my friends, actually maybe even before high school, more like middle school, I think. One of my friends really liked this game and he played it. And one of the first things he said to me about it was, he said, "What do you hate more, ice levels or fire levels?" I thought, man, I don't know. He said, because this game has both. The remarkable part about this game, though, is that I don't hate either of those zones. The Magmor Caverns being the fire area, Phendrena Drifts being the ice area, they're both fun. They don't take the fire and ice mechanics and make them obnoxious. There's no slipping around on ice, nothing like that. And yeah, the Magmor Caverns does tend to play with the whole ground is lava trick a whole lot, but as a whole, they're very well done, and they don't ever give you a feeling like you're going through them as a chore. Some of the interior areas, such as research labs and whatnot, feel a little bit more chorish because they're a little more claustrophobic. The enemies are a little bit tougher and beefier. But there's got to be that balance. There's got to be the nice, almost more relaxed exploration areas, and there's got to be the more intense, you could very well die areas. In terms of the combat itself, I know I already kind of talked about the different weapons that it gives you and everything. It's not the hardest game ever. It is kind of a game where you do kind of dictate your own fate. Effectively, if you go through and you try to unlock everything, you unlock all the super weapons, all the health tanks, all the missile expansions and everything, the game's going to be pretty easy by the end. I don't think I died once in my entire playthrough, and I never really had any point where I thought I was going to die either. The game gives you enough save points to where it's not a big deal. You can get enough of those health and missile expansions to where you don't feel like you're in any big threat. It's overall pretty easy. Granted, I have not played hard mode. I'm going to assume that it's notably more difficult in hard mode, as one would suspect. But the base game, your initial playthrough, is not going to be necessarily the hardest thing on the planet if you prepare. I could definitely see where if you're not trying to get any missile expansions and you're not trying to get any health tanks, I could see that being a different story and being probably very difficult. You do eventually get to the point where you'll be fighting enemies who can pretty much take away an entire health bar in seconds. So if you don't have anything to fall back on, that might be an issue. in terms of the atmosphere, graphics, sound, all that, the graphics hold up great. There are a few kind of corny looking effects. The fire effects, when they show up, are pretty dated. But all in all, the texture work is done in such a way to where it still looks quite good to this day. Of course, it's not an HD game. Everything is still kind of standard def with some jaggies all over the place. But the style that they present it in makes it look spectacular. You don't really ever see your character's face except for brief flashes on her visor, which is another great touch, by the way. Rain and steam affect your visor. Your visor can fog up and everything. You can see your face in it during explosions. But they use Samus's face as more of just like a animated texture on it, so they don't even have to really model a face. And everything else that you're fighting are aliens and creatures, so there's no real worry to look so realistic there, which is a great way to make sure that your game looks timeless. Don't go for extremely realistic. It's probably going to look good for a long time. So massive props to that. The sound design as well is really great. The music definitely follows suit of that sense of isolation and dread. A lot of the music feels very sort of low-key and minimalistic. Other scores, such as the initial Fendrina Drifts theme for the first time that you go to Fendrina Drifts, absolutely beautiful. Gorgeous themes. And then you have your less gorgeous themes. There's a certain theme that plays if you're in an exceptionally difficult non-boss fight encounter where it's very loud, kind of alarmy. And it works. It makes you definitely feel like you have to get out of this alive and you could very possibly die. Even if you don't think that the encounter is that hard, the music alone kind of tenses you up and gets you in that mood. So the music is used very effectively. All of the scores match the areas that they are assigned to perfectly. And the sound effects themselves are pretty good as well. I didn't notice anything that I thought was particularly bad. You get pretty sufficient feedback for if something is working or if it isn't working, and it's all very good. Like, you know if you're hitting something or if you're not. You know if they're being damaged by it. So that all comes into play very, very well. So I'd say the game's biggest faults are going to be the wonky controls. They work about as well as you're gonna get them to work given the limitations of the GameCube controller. But I don't know. I have heard some people say that the Wii version in the Metroid Prime Trilogy disc plays much better. I personally really don't like the Wii's motion control, so I don't know. Maybe they're done great in that game. Maybe they're not. I don't know. I haven't played it, but maybe someday I'll have to give it a whirl. And either way, the GameCube version of the game, very, very well done. Spectacular playthrough. I played it years ago, again when I was a kid, but I don't think I ever actually beat it, so it was really fun to actually go through and beat the whole thing. I did not 100% it. I think I got like 79%, and honestly, I have no idea where the other 21% of that game is, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff to see, lots of secrets. If you like secrets, great game. If you just like phenomenal gaming experiences in general, I would definitely recommend Metroid Prime. That's about all I got to say on the matter, though. All in all, I would say it is a very positive experience. I didn't really ever feel like I was being forced to play through it. There were times where I had to take breaks and everything, but you'll get that with any game. So all in all, great game.